Hey guys, I've been getting a lot of questions about the Code Louisville homework, and so I thought I would just make this video so people could follow along at their own speed. Um, if you are viewing this and you don't know what Code Louisville is or what this homework is, I will hopefully have this on like YouTube with the description, link in the description or something like that. I'm really just going off the cuff here, so yeah, we'll see. The first instruction says create a new console app in Visual Studio, and I'll be doing that now. The reason why we're picking a console app and why you see that is a console app is just a terminal or like a window shell. It just means that it's simply a text editor, and that makes it so we don't have to worry about all the bells and whistles of creating a GUI, which is graphical user interface. So for example, the page I'm on right now, this back button, next button, and how these all highlight, that has to be programmed, and that takes time. So we just want to get functionality on the back end. So console app is the easiest way to get there. Pick a console app, and this is called the Pet Store project. So I will be naming it that. All right, we have the code open now. It says the first line step is to add a class to your project called product. So I'm going to right click here, add new item. It's a class called product. You see that makes it here. By default, mine is internal. I'm gonna make it public. I just prefer that. It says this class can be called a base or a parent class, which we will explain. We're adding the following properties to your new class. It's going to have a name of type string. So whenever a variable or a function is declared, you always need three things. You need an access modifier, the type, and a variable and a name. Let's just say name. And just for simplicity, I'm just call this access. So these are going to be, it doesn't specify public or private, but I believe they want these to be public for now. So public, name, type, string. So public is the access, type is string, and the name is name. And then it's a price, which type decimal, so public decimal price. Quantity, which is type int, public int quantity, and then description type string. All right. Save. I like to save regularly. And so then it says add another class called cat food. Make this class inherit from the class product. Again, just going to here, new item, class cat food. And so inheritance is the colon after the declaration of a class. So this is the symbol for inheritance, and it needs to inherit from product. Now, what does that actually mean? All that says is that cat food also includes everything within product. So you could think of that simply as copying this and pasting it here. And what's the benefit of doing that? Well, let's say you have an idea of what the product is now, but maybe you haven't considered that the price will go on sale. So later down the line, you can say public int let's do decimal, sale price. And the problem is now if I have multiple different products, I have to go through every single one, like cat food, and add it again for that one. Public decimal sale price. And that can be very tedious and time consuming. So the fact that it just inherits it, but here, this product, if I make changes to product, it will make the same changes to cat food, and that is very, very useful. Oops, did the wrong thing, but hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, feel free to ask a question. All right, so it says make another class called cat food, which I have, make an inherit from the base class product. Perfect. Give cat food a few properties. Weight pounds, which is a double. I'll do that. And then kitten food, which is a type of Boolean. Perfect, that one is done. And now we're gonna make another class called dog leash. Do the same thing we've been doing. And again, this needs to inherit from product, and that is useful. Now there are multiple things that inherit from product. So if we make a change to product, again, that will make changes to both cat food and dog leash. Very useful. So dog leash is gonna have a couple properties. It'll have length inches, which is an int. And it will have material, which is a string. Now, this is giving me a nullable, non-nullable field material. This is just a warning. For the sake of this exercise, I'm not going to go into that. And additionally, you might have seen IntelliSense at some point. Tried, looking if I do it again. It won't. Oh, here we go. Getters and setters. I'm not going to worry about that right now. That is outside the scope of this assignment, but we will get to it. Just know that we are taking baby steps to build up the understanding of basic class fundamentals before we get to that. All right. Now, we want to get this console app, this is the instructions, we want to get this console app to run until the user decides to end it. We will do this by using a while loop. Loops require three things: an initial condition, a check-in condition, and a change-in condition. Our initial condition is going to be our first input from the user. Our check-in is what is in the while loop. Our change is going to be what the user inputs after an action has been complete. So let's get started with the initial condition. So it says to go to program.cs and add the following 2 lines, which I will do. I was copying this exactly from the instructions, but just so we understand, console.writeLine is simply going to take whatever you pass in as an argument and then display that in the console. So when this opens up, it will say press 1 to add a product, type exit to quit. Then the instructions say below that, type this line. So this left hand is a declaration saying that we have this new variable, which is a string, and we are naming it user input. We will assign the value of whatever the user types in response to user input. So if the user types in 1, user input will literally equal 1. And if the user types in exit, you can just mentally think of this literally being exit for the time being. But that's just a variable. Oops, a little too far. Okay, so now add your while loop. The condition in the loop should be something like this. user input to lower does not equal exit. So I will add a while user input dot to lower does not equal to exit. Great. And this to lower is just a function of strings, which you need to see when you highlight it over, the string method. And that means that the only reason it's a string method, and what that means is that because I've defined user input as a string here, user input is a string, therefore it has access to all the methods that strings have. So I can call to lower, and that will take whatever the user inputs and make them lowercase. So if they are prompted with type exit to quit here, and they end up typing something like this, exit, when C# tries to evaluate this comparison here, it will return false every time. This is false. So we need to make sure that the casing is the same. So we just put them all lowercase and check against the exit. Nice and simple. All right, inside of the this is our change condition. We will add code before this though, so it will make sense after that. Oh, here we go. Inside the brackets for the while loop, at the end, add this line. Okay, adding it again. User input equals console read line. So you see the difference here from line 9 compared to 3. I don't have the string at the start anymore, and that is because we've already declared user input as a string. We don't need to redefine what type of data user input is to the computer. It knows that user input is a string, so I can assign a string value from console read line. And then it wants us to add these two lines again. So I will do that. Now, I would argue that the fact that these lines are at the very end of a while loop and they are asked to be put in right before the while loop, that this is a prime candidate for a do while instead. I implore you to try to make this in a do while instead. You will have to change the algorithm a bit to think about how the sequence of operations needs to happen and how the prompts need to change. But I think a do while is a more elegant solution here. And so I think it's a good learning experience to try that out on your own. Inside of the while loop, above what you just add an if statement. This if statement will check the input of the user a second time to see if they wanted to add a product. We told them to enter 1 to add a product, so check that in the if statement. Okay, so an if statement looks like this, and I'm checking to see if the user input equals 1. And it's important here to note I have 1 in quotations, and that is because the user input is a string and it needs to be compared against other strings. If I had 1 here without quotes, you see how the text font color changes, and it gives me this red squiggly underlying saying that this double equals operator cannot be applied to operands of type string and int. And that's because there's no defined way to describe, but you're comparing apples and oranges. You want to be comparing things of the same type. So make sure that data on both the left and right side of a comparison is always the same type. And you can even see it here when you hover over the double equals. It's a Boolean string operator. And it's string A and string B. Okay. Create a new object. It should be cat food or dog leash, not the base class product. Note, remember to add a using statement so that the program class knows where to find your class. Okay, so using statement is interesting. This namespace pet store is almost like a dictionary or folder directive. You can kind of think of it like that. Because this program doesn't have it, if I try to reference a dog leash, you'll see IntelliSense doesn't recognize it at all. But if up at the top, just like how I have using statements here, if I type using pet store, boom, immediately this dog leash turns to that green tealish color, and that is the color which is for classes, and that's perfect. So I need to create a new object. Well, anytime an object is created, there's two parts. The declaration, which is, you can think of it just like this. Let's start with that. A string user input. This one is simple. We know we're defining a string, we're calling it user input, and then we have to set that string to a value. So our type is dog leash. The IntelliSense is going to recommend you just use a lowercase dog leash. I find a lot of new programmers get confused in their head because multiple things share the same name. I recommend new people to programming and object-oriented programming specifically to name their variables something unique against what the class name is. So just for example, you could put instance of leash, or I had put leash as one of mine. You can put my leash, put new leash. These are all great examples. Just something so that when when you're thinking about it, you don't read dog leash equals new dog leash. You can separate the type from the constructor from the variable name. So I'm just going to put leash. I think that's simple. Equals new dog leash. So now we can compare these two. You have your data type, string, and dog leash. Your variable name, user input, and leash. Then you have to assign it a new value. For user input, we were just reading from the console. And for this one, we call the constructor, which just means we want a blank slate. So hopefully that clears up any confusion about this, but if not, again, I'm always willing to help out anyone if they have questions. Let's create a new object. It should be cat food or dog leash, but not the base product. Since we don't really have a database, when we add a product, we're going to just create that object and print it to the console. We use console.write and console.readline to get data from the user and then add it to the object you just created. Since some of the types aren't going to match, you will need to convert them using the target types parse method. So to turn a string into an int, use int.parse. Okay, that's just an explanation. Step number 14 doesn't really have us do anything. To make printing the object easier, okay, so it just wants us to, do that. It's not that clear. Okay, so what are the things that we can set for a leash? Well, a dog leash has a length in inches and material. So let's start there. I just like to copy lines. And it wants us in a right instead of a right line. And so whenever I am going to do a right, I always like to put a colon and a space afterwards at the end of the string. That way it looks nicer for the user because their cursor will look just very similar to how this looks right now, where they can enter like 8, versus if you don't have that, press 1, add a new product, and they'll type 8 here, and it kind of doesn't separate the prompt versus the answer. So I will have this, but I will ask, what is the material type? Let me change this. Please enter the material type. It's way more of a command because I don't feel like I need a punctuation at the end of command. But that's just personal preference. So then console.readLine. And because we are asking them to enter material type, we are going to assign leash.material to what they enter. Now, console.write, please enter the length in inches. And we have leash.length in inches equals console.readLine. But wait a second, it's throwing an error. Console.readLine is a string. Length in inches is an integer. There's an easy fix for that. We do int.parse, which is a method built in with side integers that converts I'll read it exactly. Converts the string representation of a number to its 32-bit signed integer equivalent. Perfect. That's exactly what we're looking for. All right. But wait a second. I have way more options here than just length, inches, and material. Oh yes, that's because we can't forget about product. There's name, price, quantity, and description. So let's enter those in beforehand. I'm just going to copy these as groups. I know I need 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so the first one is name. What do we have? Let's actually, we can do this nice thing where we can split screen. Name, price, quantity, description. Please enter the name. Perfect. Please enter the price. And again, price is not a string, so we will need to do decimal.parse. Please enter the quantity. And again, int.parse. Please enter the description. Perfect. Now I can re-merge this tab here. So this is nice and big. And now we have successfully prompted the user for all the variables, properties that we have, and assigned them. It has, step 15 says that we should use a JSON serializer. I had a lot of people talk about the errors they were running into with this, and I think string formatting is an important lesson to learn, so I'm going to go through with it in the string formatting direction. String formatting is not something that's specific to C#. if you are learning any different language and you need to learn how to format a string, Googling the language name string formatting will usually help you right away. So we're going to do console.writeLine and then string.format. There are multiple ways to do this in C#. I'm going to show you this one. And then the way this works is it's going to look for curly braces and a value, and then replace that value with whatever I put here, like it's trying to replace with args. So I'm going to say leash.name is my first variable. Leash.price is my next variable. Leash.quantity, third variable. Leash.description, fourth variable. Leash.material, fifth, and leash.length inches. Okay. So I'll just type name, space 0. This will evaluate to name the colon, and then leash.name will be replaced with what is in here. There's a little trick with strings as well. A \t is a tab, and a \n is a new line. And you can see it's a little orange in here. It's trying to tell you that this is going to be interpreted differently. So I'm going to use a new line. I think this looks a little cleaner. Type in price space 1, and I'm just going to keep doing this. Quantity. I keep getting ahead of myself and typing the wrong thing. What's after quantity? Description. Material. And notice how I started with 0 here. That is because lots of programming languages have 0 index counting, where 0 is the first element, followed by 1, 2, 3, 4. And length inches. All right, I know this is a long line. I believe you can do something like this. I don't remember fully, but there's a way to like merge across multiple lines. Maybe it's just this. It's not giving me an error. So I'll try it. All right, let's run the code, see if it works. All right, so I'm having some technical difficulties getting it properly recorded. Just know that I did execute the program exactly how it was shown. Pressed pet store up here. It works. The only thing I noticed is I had to change a couple of these. I had /t, change them to /n for new line. Made it look just cleaner. But other than that, there were no errors. It worked exactly like intended. So if you guys have any other questions, feel free to reach out. I would be happy to help. Thanks.